can gain access to that secondary information, to that secondary statistics. And I would recommend that you, perhaps to make it easy on yourself, undertake quantitative data, but quantitative data in terms of secondary information and not hard information, and not primary information. But if you wanted to conduct primary information, primary research in terms of quantitative data, then you must also consider looking at the different types of methods to collect the information. And the thing that you must look at is firstly clearly defining your population. And once you've defined your population, you must then define your sampling frame. Your sampling frame within your total population. And then within the sampling frame, you must determine how you're going to conduct that sample. And there are different ways to conduct your sample. For instance, there is simple random sampling. Simple random sampling, whereby every item in that sampling frame has an equal opportunity of being selected. Okay, so you take the total population, you take the sample, and then within those samples, which would be a smaller percentage of the total population, but nevertheless representative of the total population, each one of those sample units with an equal opportunity of being selected. This is simple random sampling. You have systematic sampling within the sampling frame, and the systematic sampling is saying I'll take every nth or every ninth member and I'll sample that unit. So and that is done systematically. Or you could then take stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling is very simple, similar to it's cluster sampling. So we're talking about cluster sampling first. And in cluster sampling, the population is divided into clusters. And then, from those clusters, all objectives are included into the sampling frame. So the clusters could be, for instance, if it was a clusters of a company, you could cluster them by the different departments or the different functions. So the marketing department, the HR department, the finance department, the accounts department, the administration department. And then all members in each of the departments, you could take a certain number within each of those clusters. And then you have stratified random sampling. And in stratified random sampling, it's very simple to cluster sampling in that the clusters are taken, but then these are done proportionately. So for instance, if you had marketing department and sales department, and you had 10 people in marketing, but you had 20 people in finance department. So because there was twice as many people in the finance department, when you were taking your sample, you would take twice as many samples in the finance department as opposed to marketing, because there's only 10 in marketing and 20 in finance. So with the stratified random sampling, you're actually taking it in proportion to the number in each of the clusters, whereas clusters, you're not doing that. So when you're looking at primary data for quantitative data, you have to define your population, you have to then define your sampling frame, and then say to yourself, how are you going to carry out the sample? Is it going to be by simple random sampling? Is it going to be by systematic sampling? Is it going to be by cluster sampling? Or is it going to be by stratified cluster sampling? And then after you've decided that, how and which method are you going to use in terms of collecting the data? Is it going to be by a questionnaire, by one-to-one interview, a questionnaire by telephone, a questionnaire by mail, or questionnaire done on the internet, online. So how is this actually going to be done? So that is, looking at the quantitative data. You can do quantitative data in terms of primary research or quantitative data in terms of secondary research. So either way, personally, because of the amount of words you could be writing, I would possibly look at quantitative data in terms of secondary research, in terms of finding out statistical information that already exists in terms of your subject area that you're looking at. But we still haven't finished there, because the question says carry out a small-scale research by applying quantitative and qualitative data. Qualitative data. So now we need to look at qualitative data. Now, qualitative research. Now, before we said that qualitative research is research that tells us, why and how, people's opinions and people's views on things. So again, you actually have two options. You can actually look at qualitative data in terms of secondary information, in terms of research that has already been conducted about people's opinions, people's views, telling people why and how people do things in terms of your corporate social responsibility, in terms of your projects, in terms of what you want to achieve. So you could actually do that in terms of secondary information. Or alternatively, you could actually do qualitative data in terms of primary research. Now, if you're going to do qualitative data in terms of primary research, you really have to then look at the ways you're going to conduct your research, the research methodology, which is what P4 is asking you to do. So here you have to say to yourself, if you're doing qualitative primary research, then you can either do one-to-one interviews, so you need to construct a questionnaire with open-ended questions. So the question needs to be constructed very carefully and very concisely in terms of open-ended questions. And then after the open-ended questions, you follow the interviewee in terms of, for a final technique, in terms of wide questions and then down to very specific questions. Or you could have a group of people and undertake a group discussion and find out people's opinions. But nevertheless, you will still construct various questions that you want to ask the whole group. And then asking the whole group, you will try and work out, again, a funnel technique from a wide perspective leading down to a narrow perspective. So you need to look at how you're going to do that. And that, obviously, it needs to be in relation to your subject area, in terms of your project aims and the project objectives. Now, going back to the question says carry out a small-scale research by applying quantitative and qualitative research methods appropriate for meeting project aims and objectives. So already we know that the appropriate aims and objectives, you've already done that in P1. You've done your aims and you've done your list of objectives. In P2, you would have done your Gantt chart, and a Gantt chart with specific time frames. In P3, you would have looked at, in P2, the project management plan. In P3, the Gantt chart, and in P4, qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, I would recommend you do one primary research and one secondary research. I wouldn't recommend you doing two primary research for both quantitative and qualitative research methods. So if you're going to do primary research for quantitative, then I would say for the qualitative research, do secondary research, or vice versa. Otherwise, it's going to be too time consuming and too much work involved in that. So that's what I would personally recommend. One primary research for either quantitative or qualitative, and one secondary research for quantitative or qualitative research. So I hope I have made that slightly clearer for you. And we've done it in, as I said, in this absolutely beautiful, stunning, wonderful location. And this is again for Mr. T, and we are at the Alva Glen in this stunning, most beautiful and most gorgeous place. And if we take a little walk down here, we can see down there, which is really nice. And we're going to just walk on to this little footbridge. Absolutely beautiful here.